Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 5. Chapter 34-43. You belong to us. His voice sent desire rushing through me, igniting a fire between my legs. I couldn't help it when my thighs clenched together, trying to alleviate some of the pressure. Alpha Maddox didn't miss a single thing. His blackened eyes flickered from my flushed face to my clenched thighs, a low growl leaving his lips. It's time you remembered that. Alpha Maddox snarled, lunging at me. My instincts kicked in as I watched this rage-filled Alpha charge at me. I tried jumping to the side, but Alpha Maddox's rage made him faster and much stronger. I was thrown over his shoulder like a sack of flour. A low grunt left my mouth as my stomach came in contact with his shoulder. The fire between my legs was burning out of control now, potential punishments running through my head. My defiance and willpower remained stronger than ever. While there was little chance I'd manage to escape Alpha Maddox, I'd never come quietly. I thrashed on his shoulder, flailing my legs and pounding my fists against his back. I don't belong to anyone. I snapped, my small fist bouncing against his chiseled back. I could feel his hardened muscles under my fists, making it harder to concentrate. Thick-headed, angry Alpha. I grunted. A loud clap sound filled the room, and a stinging pain radiated up my backside. Alpha Maddox raised his hand and slapped my bottom again. The stinging pain continued, but it only stoked the blazing fire between my legs. My bottom was right by his face, and I was nearly positive he could smell my arousal. The more you fight me, the longer this will take. Alpha Maddox snarled, yanking my bedroom door open. He stalked across the hall, flinging open his bedroom doors. I had to take a moment to look around, my eyes wide in wonder. Alpha Maddox's room was much nicer than my own. While the color scheme throughout the house was white and other cream tones, Alpha Maddox's bedroom was almost entirely black. A black four-poster bed sat off in the middle of the room, black carpets and drapes to match. Alpha Maddox had an entire bar at his disposal, nestled in the corner of the room. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized this was Tyler's old room. The differences between Tyler and Alpha Maddox were staggering, and I wondered how I ever fell for Tyler in the first place. I didn't do anything wrong. I hissed. A loud whimper left my lips when Alpha Maddox raised his hand and assaulted my bottom. The pain mingled with pleasure and stoked the raging inferno between my legs. I could feel my wetness as I clenched my thighs together. I hoped the smell of my arousal would keep Alpha Maddox from actually murdering me. Quiet! Alpha Maddox snarled, tossing me down on his bed. Save your voice, you're going to need it when I have you screaming. I visibly clenched my legs together as I sat in the middle of Alpha Maddox's bed. His musky scent swirled on the blankets invitingly, urging me to give up my fight and let Alpha Maddox have his way. I wanted to be a good girl for him, I really did, but he made it so hard. The irritation at my disobedience was incredibly alluring, and I couldn't help but be so defiant. I watched in stunned silence as Alpha Maddox removed the belt he was wearing, holding the thick material between his fingers. His eyes never once left my own. Put your hands behind your back. Alpha Maddox's voice was deadly calm, his fury was contained for the moment but still there in the front of his mind. My mouth flopped open, the blood rushing to my face. He's probably going to strangle us. Maya groaned, her voice nearly making me jump. I don't think that's what he has in mind. I murmured, embarrassment flooding my face. Of all the times I imaged Alpha Maddox taking me fully, I never truly thought what I would do when it happened. That fact only reminded me how truly inexperienced I was. No. I scoffed, pushing myself further away from Alpha Maddox. My face was reddening as I realized what I had gotten myself into. It wasn't like I knew one word would send Alpha Maddox into a Lola-obsessed rage. Then get on your knees. Alpha Maddox smirked deeply, his eyes still burning with anger. Choose. Maya's ears perked up when she learned we weren't going to be MD by Alpha Maddox. I didn't think my face could flush this much, but his demands were putting all sorts of images into my mind. I throbbed in response, urging me to make a decision. I'll choose for you then. Alpha Maddox looked down at me darkly. Before I could fling myself from the bed, his large hand wrapped around my ankle. I glared back at him, unable to do much else. My heart was thundering, the rest of my body responding on its own. Alpha Maddox yanked me across the bed, towards him. His hands lifted from my legs, grabbing me by the waist until I sat on my knees. I glared up at him menacingly, but my eyes burned with arousal. I refused to look at the growing bulge in his pants, resisting the strong urge to graze my fingers against it. Alpha Maddox looked down at me, and something almost soft ran across his gaze as he glided his thumb along my bottom lip. Don't bite, Lola. Alpha Maddox's voice was no longer a rage-filled growl, but was low and husky. My eyes widened as Alpha Maddox undid his pants, dropping them to the floor. My eyes were glued to it instantly, realizing what was about to go in my mouth. I wasn't completely ignorant, I knew what a BJ was, but I couldn't fathom how he was going to fit. I was throbbed at what was about to happen next, and ultimately won the battle. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Alpha Maddox murmured, his dark eyes locked on my own. It's going to be a long night, Lola. My eyes widened at his words, yet my body begged for more. Tonight is a punishment, Lola. Tears burned in my eyes as Alpha Maddox continued F-king my face. Chapter 35. Little to no sunlight streamed through the Black Sea *S, making me wonder if it was still dark outside. It took a few moments for my brain to clear of the morning fogginess, then I remembered the night I had. An irritating soreness radiated from in between my legs as I shifted in bed. Alpha Maddox had let me sleep in his bed. I half expected him to toss me in my room and call it a night. Something of Alpha Maddox's would have to do. Alpha Maddox sat on the edge of the bed, his muscular back facing me. Clutching the blanket to my chest, I stumbled from the bed. My legs felt like jello, numb from the night I had. Alpha Maddox turned, looking at me sideways. His eyes darkened as he took in my flushed state, my hair messy from sleep. Good morning, Lola. His voice was raspy, still thick with sleep. A wicked smirk formed on his face, one that had me thinking about last night's events. Alpha Maddox stood from the bed, stepping on the blanket I had draped around my body. His large hands grasped the blanket and pulled, tearing it from my body. Cool air rushed against my heated skin, and my arms snapped up to cover my exposed chest. Do not hide yourself from me, Lola. Alpha Maddox growled, I won't tell you again. Blush crawled up to my face as Alpha Maddox's dark eyes roamed my chest. Softly, he lifted a finger and traced the deep purple marks he had left on my skin. Who do you belong to? Alpha Maddox growled, his eyes dancing with amusement. I knew if I stated my mind, he'd never let me leave this bedroom. My lady bits might fall off. Instead of being defiant, yours. My voice still had that disobedient edge to it, one that made Alpha Maddox's smirk deepen. Good girl. Alpha Maddox murmured, pressing his face against my hair and inhaling deeply. I have work to do. Alpha Maddox murmured, don't be late for training tomorrow. Alpha Maddox retreated into the bathroom, and I walked over to his closet. I grabbed a simple black t-shirt, inhaling deeply at his scent. I slipped it on over my body and exited his bedroom, slamming into Beta Devon. Oh, Lola. Beta Devon cleared his throat, his eyes widening as he took in my current outfit. Is Alpha Maddox in? My face heated to a bright crimson, and my jaw threatened to drop. Beta Devon. I stammered, he's in the bathroom. Thank you, Lola. Beta Devon nodded, his lips twitching. I think I'll come back later. Beta, this really isn't what it looks like. I shook my head, toying with the shirt that hung to my knees. Beta Devon smirked, I'd never assume such things. I darted into my bedroom, hearing Beta Devon's deep laughter rumbling down the hall. I inwardly cringed with embarrassment, hoping Beta Devon would keep yet another secret for me. I took a quick shower, washing my fluids from last night off my body. There wasn't much for me to do today, so I figured I'd walk back to my old house. There were a few odds and ends I wanted to bring back to the pack house. After slipping on some jeans and a blouse, I grabbed an empty bag and walked downstairs. The pack house was virtually empty, scarce except for a few servants and the maid. I slipped out the front door and began walking down the street. I hesitated at the front door, wondering if I now needed to knock. Just as my hand wrapped around the door KB, the front door swung open. I told you she was coming over. Grandma shouted at my dad, who sat at the kitchen table. Would it kill you to have a little faith in me? Dad raised his eyebrow at Grandma and grumbled something unintelligible, his face lighting up when he saw me standing through the door frame. Back already? Dad chuckled, looking happier than he's been in weeks. Already getting on Alpha Maddox's nerves? Of course not. I grinned innocently, the throbbing between my legs a constant reminder of Alpha Maddox's touch. You know I'd never antagonize him on purpose. Dad's smile dropped, a smirk taking over his face. Alpha Maddox must be a patient man. I don't think patience has anything to do with it. Grandma chuckled to herself, hungry, dear? Of course. I grinned, hoping Dad would forget her little comment. I sat down at my usual spot, digging in once Grandma placed a plate in front of me. Dad took a deep drink from his coffee mug, eyeing me warily. I was scarfing down my food like a rabid animal. An entire night of endless and no water breaks took a toll on your body. They not feeding you over there? Dad raised his eyebrow, setting his newspaper down on the table. I shrugged, I haven't eaten since dinner last night. I woke up a little late. Dad grunted and nodded his head, still no word from Sean. It's only been a few days. I gave him a small smile, he'll contact us when he's ready. He won't be gone long. I hope not. Dad grunted, first I worried about you, now I'm worrying about him. You're always gonna worry. I chuckled, that's part of your job. The two of you could make it a little easier on me. Dad huffed. You never made it easy on me. Grandma scolded Dad, waving a spatula in his direction. I remember multiple instances where you'd run off in the middle of the night. I didn't think you knew about that. Dad grumbled, his face turning a light pink. Grandma rolled her eyes, of course I knew. You weren't very quiet about it. I chuckled to myself, listening to their bickering as I ate my breakfast. After eating, I walked into my old bedroom. I began filling my bag with some odds and ends I wanted to bring. A stuffed animal, a few books, some extra socks. I saw it sitting on the windowsill, my brain working to process how it had gotten there. A white index card sat on the windowsill, the place I had been frozen at the night of Kenyon's DH. I couldn't understand how it had been placed here. It must have been in the night, but how would they get past the patrol teams? I refused to let myself feel afraid, reminding myself I had wanted this. I wanted another chance at finding out why Kenyon and Katie died. I wanted the closure for their families, and the information for Alpha Maddox. Yet, the sight of the notes still made my blood turn cold. I knew once this was all over, I'd never look at a white index card the same way. I lifted the card and opened it gingerly, unfazed when a photo fell out. I looked down at the photo in interest. The red flashing lights made my hair a shiny auburn color. Tristan was gazing down at me, his eyes glued to my neck. My lips were parted, a dreamy look on my face as I gazed at him. Someone had seen Tristan and I at the club, had watched as he lulled me into a false sense of security. I hadn't even noticed someone standing close by, a camera in hand. In fact, I couldn't remember anyone else from that night. All I could remember was Tristan, Mason, and Brianna. The note was written in the same elegant script, but the threat was clear on paper. Busy night? I will give you one last chance. Meet tonight, same place midnight. Come alone. If you fail to show, another life will be taken, one close to heart. Chapter 36. My idea was stupid, very stupid. It would result in plenty of people being angry at me, Alpha Maddox included. But, if I pulled it off everything would be fine, right? I couldn't tell Maddox about the note. I knew I should, I wanted to desperately. But the note specifically said to come alone, and Alpha Maddox would never allow that. He would hinder our one chance at information for my personal safety. While I appreciated the notion, I couldn't pass up a chance like this. Alpha Maddox would be furious, but hopefully the information I provided would help placate him. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't going in completely blind. I recruited the two people I trusted the most. You're insane. Brianna threw her hands to the sky, that vampire turned your brain to mush. I know it's a bad idea. I frowned, pleading for their support with my eyes. But you saw the threat. Someone close to heart. That could be you, Mason, Dad, or Grandma. I purposefully left out Sean. For once, I was glad he left. He didn't need to be dragged into this. Sean was safe, that much I believed in. I didn't bother mentioning Alpha Maddox in my little list, I couldn't see Tyler actually managing to KL him. Brianna frowned, her eyes flickering to the white index card. That doesn't change the fact that your idea is downright suicidal. Brianna shook her head, giving Mason a hard look. It's well thought out. Mason frowned, but so much could go wrong. I know. I sighed, but what else can I do? You could start with telling Alpha Maddox. Brianna frowned, but she knew that wasn't an option. If I told him, he'd never let me go. I grimaced, he'd send his men and whoever sent the card would know. They'd KL someone close to me before I could even scream. Brianna went quiet, and I knew I had her. Mason fixed me with a worried stare, rolling his bottom lip in between his teeth. If we can't talk you out of it then we have to help. Mason frowned at Brianna. Brianna sighed, well, what's your plan? I grinned at my two best friends, even with the haunted looks on their faces. I'm going to go alone. I sighed, I'll keep you and Mason in a constant mind link. You'll know everything that's going on, and everything that's being said. If something happens to me, make sure the information gets to Alpha Maddox. We need a backup plan. Brianna grimaced, we can't just leave you unprotected. I paused, if things go south, I'll alert you too. Bring Alpha Maddox and all of his men. All right, Brianna still looked troubled, I can live with that. Good. I nodded. How will we know where to find you? Mason frowned, I've never seen a swimming hole around here. Alpha Maddox knows. My voice held many meanings, the main one being determination. Everything was set, the plan, location and time. My only worry was sneaking out of the house, making sure I wasn't caught by Alpha Maddox. Mason headed home early, after getting a call from his mom. That left me and Brianna sitting in my bedroom alone. She looked troubled, more so than usual. Brianna always had that carefree feel to her, but she looked downright anxious. Don't worry. I smiled at her, everything will work out. My stomach was in knots as well. I knew it wasn't that simple, but I tried to soothe my friend. There was so much that could go wrong with this plan, but I couldn't give it up. I needed to know who was behind this, and if it had any ties to Tristan. So many questions swarmed in my head. Did they know about my heritage, what I truly am? Did they want to use that against the pack? What if that vampire is connected in all of this? Brianna frowned, giving me a worried look. What if he's there tonight? I frowned, a clear image of Tristan running through my mind. Brianna had a solid point. Thinking about Tristan made his mark on my skin, and that small part of my mind longed for his cooling touch. His mark had an effect on me, making me long for him in his absence. Grandma said something about training me to defend myself against their mind games. I paused, I don't see why she couldn't give me some pointers. Without giving away my plan, of course. Brianna nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I think that would be a good idea. We sat in silence for a moment, when Brianna asked me something unexpected. What's it like? Brianna frowned, her eyes flickering to where the scarlet mark sat on my shoulder. Being marked by one of them. Anxiety was a constant companion these past few days, breathing down my neck in times like this. It's strange. Strange was the only word that seemed to fit. It's like some small part of me misses him, when really I don't even know the guy. My mom said with werewolves, the mate bond connects you to the person. You can hear their thoughts, and even feel some of their emotions. Brianna explained, is it anything like that? I don't know. I answered honestly, I don't feel anyone else's emotions, and I'm definitely not hearing any thoughts. There isn't much space left in my head with Maya there. I heard that. Maya grumbled, giving me a playful growl. Do you think it's possible? Brianna questioned, only making me more worried. I'd assume the mark isn't finished. With werewolves both partners have to mark the other. I wonder if it's the same with vampires. I wish we could find out. I sighed, I thought your mom would be able to help. Brianna's face turned up in a small grin, ever since you asked for texts about vampires, Mom's been scouring the United States for another. I chuckled, really? Who knew we had Miss Shelby on our side? My mom fights on the side of knowledge and truth. Brianna rolled her eyes, reciting something her mom had been saying for years. Maybe she'll find something that'll help us. I tried to keep my tone positive, but I knew the chances were slim. I'll keep you updated in case she does. Brianna nodded. Now, where did you want Mason and I tonight? I pursed my lips. Hang around the training grounds, but stay out of sight. Head to the back of the building, no one should see you over there. That way you're close enough in case I need you. Got it. Brianna nodded, the worry still clear in her eyes. Be safe out there, Lola. I will. I smiled at her. We both know I can handle myself against Tyler. Tyler isn't what I'm worried about. She chuckled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The two of us headed to the kitchen after our long conversation, munching on some baked goods Grandma had made. Brianna left early, heading back home to sleep while she had the chance. I had the feeling the three of us were definitely going to be lacking sleep tonight. I was too on edge to even think about taking a nap. Midnight was a while away, and the minutes ticked by excruciatingly slow. Where'd Dad go? I turned to Grandma, nibbling on my third cookie. Grandma was washing some dishes, her eyes trained out the little window. I must have pulled her from her thoughts, and I watched the haze leave her eyes. Picking up a few things from the grocery store. Grandma smiled softly, turning the sink off and facing me. I haven't asked how you're faring with everything. No need to ask. I forced a smile at my grandmother, knowing she could see right through it. I'm dealing with it. The way I see it, I can't change who I am. You're right, you can't. Grandma frowned. I know you keep things to yourself, and deal with them on your own, but you don't have to. Your dad made a mistake not telling you sooner. He did. I agreed, but when I thought about it, what would be the right time to explain that? Have you ever met my mom's mate before? Some small part of me wanted to resent my mom. She cheated on Dad, and ended up pregnant with a vampire's child. My resentment faded as I remembered Mom and Dad were never mates to begin with. I couldn't imagine the struggle she went through, loving someone and knowing she could never have them. Grandma's face went dark, her eyebrows turning down in a grimace. I had never seen Grandma look that way before. The expression on her face haunted me, and made me wonder what type of man my father actually was. Once. Grandma nodded. It was not a pleasant experience. Your father is the reason I learned to shield my mind. Maya's ears perked up. She was all too eager to learn how to protect our mind. She wouldn't admit it, but the thought of her being locked away and forgotten terrified her. We were two halves of a whole, and she feared what would happen to me in her absence. He messed with your head. I frowned, so he was a pure blood. Grandma nodded. He messed with my head all right. Could you teach me? I leaned forward, my eyes burning with interest. Could we start now? Grandma's stern face softened. We can try. It takes time to master. You must learn to control yourself and your emotions to block other influences out. How do I begin? I grinned up at her. If only I had known what I was getting myself into. Chapter 37. Unknown P.O.V. I had known from the beginning, trusting Tyler Vale was a mistake. The pampered mutt had come scrambling to us. He was frantic, reeking with the fear that made me want to retch. His proposition was intriguing to say the least. Odds were my forte. Betting was something I enjoyed, something I excelled in. Reading the emotions on a person's face was child's play, but if you did it right it could reveal the things they wish to keep secret. Revenge, his motivation, as it typically is. His beloved pack was taken, due to his own ignorance and foolishness. Now he needed aid, help to destroy the enemies that threatened his way of life. Looking at Tyler Vale, it was clear to see he was a weak excuse for a werewolf. He lacked the pulsating power that surrounded an alpha. His BH clung to his side, reeking of fear. I had not met a Luna in this lifetime, but I was knowledgeable about their way of life. She lacked confidence, conviction, and from the looks of it her loyalty to her mate was faulty. They had come to us knowing they would never survive on their own. They needed us. We could care less for the pampered mutts, living in their pristine packs. Happiness, love, and respect for all as a motto. The weakness was pathetic. Their civilized pack life left them with their guard down, and ripe for the picking. I was born, destined to become second in command. The title had ran in my family for many generations. The pampered mutts would call my group a pack, but that is not something we wish to go by. Life in my pack was cold and cruel, the only thing that mattered was surviving and pleasing the king. We have no alpha, we have a king. I had been raised to praise our king above all else, to serve him and his purpose until the end of my life. I had spent my childhood elated with that fact, my heart full of purpose and determination. Everything had been perfect, until I met her. Tyler Vale and his BH had managed an audience with our king. I was sure the two of them would not leave the room alive, in fact, I was eager for it. Tyler Vale had a sense of arrogance that followed him, a slimy sense of entitlement. If only he knew how fragile his position truly was. Alphas come and go, kings remain. Alpha Maddox Desmond. The name left Tyler Vale's thin lips, and I knew our fate was sealed. Alpha Maddox Desmond, alpha to the largest pack in the world. An enemy to all who refused to adapt to his lifestyle. In a world full of many species, not all were cut out for the pack life. Tyler Vale had our king's attention, something that was rare. It was easy to see the hatred in Tyler Vale's eyes. He detested our way of life, disagreed with it wholeheartedly. With our king's interest piqued, I and the rest of his men were ushered into another room. Everyone took a seat around a large table. Tyler Vale and his BH were off to the side. Tyler Vale contained his hatred and fear behind a mask, his BH did not have the skill to do the same. Her beady little eyes darted around the room, her disdain thick in the air. An hour passed, followed by 2 hours. A deal was finally struck. Tyler Vale wanted Alpha Maddox Desmond out of the way, wiped from history permanently. Our king was more than willing to provide his assistance. The young Alpha posed a threat to many. It was time the power shifted, handed to another. Tyler Vale and his BH, who apparently does not enjoy being called that, requested some form of protection. Our king was not a generous man, nor was he forgiving. I was struck with surprise when he offered a handful of men to be at their disposal. The men were of lower ranks, but they were able bodies capable of action. Once the pampered mutts left, our king turned and faced us. We were his inner circle, the men he trusted with the most information. "My lord, are we truly going to help them?" Antonio asked, his hardened face held a mask of confusion. The rest of us stilled, waiting for our king's reaction or command. "We will aid in ridding the world of the putrid Alpha." Our king nodded, his fingertips grazing across his skin as he was lost in thought. "But we will never allow another to take over." "What would you have us do?" Antonio had spoken up again. Antonio was one of the newer recruits into the inner circle, he was bold with his words, and his questions. Our king paused, something dark flickering across his eyes. "Instill fear in them, while we gather men. I want them blind and afraid before we strike." The king turned to Antonio, and I watched calmly at what unfolded next. "Cripple their senses." The king spoke softly. Faster than Antonio could register, the king's sharpened nail grazed both of his eyes. A scream filled the silent room, Antonio's scream. Thick blood sprayed the ground. Our king walked on, but he continued speaking. A weeping vertical line across Antonio's face sprouted, his eyes nearly split in two. His wails filled the room, yet none of us reacted. "Leave them a paranoid mess." The king continued speaking softly, and when they least expect it. The king approached Antonio's cowering form. Antonio's hands were over his bleeding eyes, and the king forced him to his feet. "End them." The king spoke with finality, swiping his lengthened nail across Antonio's throat. The scent of coppery blood filled the room, thick and heavy in the air. A gurgle left Antonio's mouth before his body collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. The man was too bold, too inexperienced in dealing with the king. It was a miracle his DH had not come sooner. "Am I understood?" The king turned to the rest of us. None of us said a word, we didn't need to. The king knew we understood, knew we would follow his commands without hesitation. "Cloak your scent." The king murmured, "They mustn't know of us yet. I want them in the dark about the very force that threatens to eradicate them." A month of stakeouts, break-ins and spying before a wild card was thrown into the mix. A wild card named Lola. We had been keeping close tabs on Alpha Maddox Desmond's pack for a month now, learning their routine and their way of life. I took one glance at Alpha Maddox Desmond and knew he was a force to be reckoned with. The king asked my opinion, something he did only when he wanted to know my input on the odds. I told him the truth, that Alpha Maddox Desmond would not fall easily. Rumors were buzzing around the territory we observed, rumors surrounding a girl. The girl had strong ties with Tyler Vale, leaving after he discovered his mate. Things had been shaken up by her arrival. A new player. My thoughts churned with interest, my gut telling me she was no pawn. My curiosity was staggering, an emotion I hadn't felt in years. I had no self-control at the time, peering down at her through her window. It was when I first set eyes on her, that I noticed something strange. Her scent, it was different. Only a seasoned hunter could notice such a minuscule difference. Whatever was unique about her, it was buried deep. Suppressed throughout the years, waiting to be unleashed. I pulled my phone out, snapping a picture of her sleeping figure. Her face serene and peaceful, dark lashes framing her large eyes. I learned all I could of the girl, of the family she lived and ate with. When I was satisfied with my findings, I approached the king. I kept my tone polite, yet strong. Our king hated weakness, snuffed the signs out before they could grow. He listened to my counsel, heeding my words about the girl. The king was exceptionally skilled at keeping his inner thoughts from his face, but no wall was ever perfect. The king was someone I had difficulty reading, someone whose emotions I tried to ignore. I showed the king the picture I had taken of the girl. Curiosity flashed across the king's eyes, then recognition. "I want her under close watch," the king ordered, bringing in additional men. "Leave her notes." The king ordered me personally, "I want her aware of our presence, but reveal nothing." "Yes, my lord." I nodded, and left the room. I had yet to discover the importance of the young girl, but my curiosity would not allow me to stop. I needed a clear view of the situation, knowledge of all the players and components in this large game. The first KI had been planned out extensively, their patrol teams monitored closely. The victim was a girl named Katie, I believe. All that stood out about the victim was her flaming locks. Tearing her throat had been easy enough. I wiped the blood from my hands, speeding into the darkness as two wolves came into view. I noticed Lola immediately, the feeling I had buried within me came to life at the sight of her dark wolf. She looked at me, her bright eyes burning into the darkness at where I stood. It was clear she saw nothing, but her eyes were right where they needed to be. The breeze shifted, and even in her wolf form, I caught the scent. The wild card, the key player, had a secret even she was not aware of. Lola was a half-breed. Chapter 38. Unknown P.O.V. Lola had become a key player in this game of ours, a game that ended in life and DH. What was even more entertaining, she was clueless about her true nature. An anomaly, half werewolf, half vampire. Something such as her simply didn't exist in our world. You were one of three: human, werewolf, vampire. There were plenty of werewolves and vampires mixed with humans, but humans were a grey area. Werewolves had their mates, vampires chose their own. Werewolves never mated with vampires, it simply wasn't fate. Something had changed, gone wrong in the making of this wild card. I was bloodthirsty, determined to find every facet of the truth. I started with Lola's parents, digging up every lead I could. All known records stated both parents as werewolves. An interesting piece of evidence gave me insight to Lola's parents. I had proof her mother had given birth to her. It was quite easy to deduce from there. Her mother was unfaithful, coupling with a vampire behind her husband's back. Thus produced, Lola. It was a simple hunch that forced me to dig for the identity of Lola's father. It was nearing impossible, as there were no records. She had upped the odds in Alpha Maddox Desmond's favor, shifting the game. Lola was a factor I hadn't anticipated, but I feverishly enjoyed. A wild card, someone able to play for either team. The king's interest in her piqued my own, and I longed to learn the reason behind his well-placed facade. What was Lola to our king? His interest could easily be due to her heritage. The chance at having a mole on the inside was incredibly attractive. There were thousands of ways we could dispose of Alpha Maddox Desmond with the help of Lola, the victory would be much too easy. The king had me following Lola, learning her every move. He wanted to know the extent of her loyalty and the chance of it being swayed. The odds were not shifting in our favor. Her loyalty to her pack was strong, her ties to her family were unbreakable. And yet, everyone has a weakness. Everyone has a string to pull, one that can shift them entirely. Another factor was thrown into the mix when I nearly walked in on a private conversation between the king and someone else. The voice was familiar, the nasal pattern unflattering. I remained silent, forcing my ears to identify the muffled voice behind the thick door. A name clicked in my mind: Brittany. Just as the name registered, the door swung open. Brittany's eyes widened as they looked over my impassive face. I kept my piqued curiosity hidden away, concealing it behind a mask. The fear was painted all over her features, even as she struggled to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The king was behind her, his face trained on my own. "Come inside." The king ushered me in, sending Brittany away. "I have confided in you on numerous occasions, have I not?" The king questioned, turning his head to meet my eyes. There was something dark lingering in his gaze, something I had seen numerous times. "I am grateful to be trusted, my lord." I nodded, my voice even. "And will provide counsel when you see fit." The king paused, his eyes analyzing. Concealing myself was an art my family had taught since I could speak. You could never let someone know what you were thinking, what you were feeling. "It seems, Brittany has a game of her own she wishes to play." The king's lips turned up in a cruel sneer. "I've accepted, of course." I let interest flash in my eyes, and the king's sneer widened. "Ever the gambler?" The king noted, his voice amused. "It is a skill of mine, my lord." I nodded, "I enjoy odds." "And it is your skill I wish to utilize." The king smiled, but there was no friendliness. "Tell me, if Tyler and Brittany were to fight, who do you think would win?" The question caught me off guard for a split second, but I thought about it closely. Tyler Vale held a shield of arrogance around him, spewing bull sh*t about his birthright. Brittany was smart enough to fear us, to keep her eyes peeled at every moment. The glint in her eye was that of a wounded animal, one ready to lash out. Brittany. I nodded, giving my answer. I believe Brittany would win, my lord. Why? The king grinned, as if he had already known my answer. She's a female, wouldn't the male have better odds? Not always, my lord. I kept my words clipped. Females are often resourceful, working behind the scenes. I do hope you are right. The king grinned. Another alpha in the ground would only benefit us. Why not just end his life, my lord? I bowed my head. Second in command gave me more leniency with my actions around the king. He did not mind questions, only if few and far between. You enjoy the odds. The king smiled ruefully. I enjoy the game. The king was planning something he would not reveal to me. Whatever the plan was, it was important. Haze, a putrid-smelling club, set with flashing lights and thundering music. I knew many others who would have thoroughly enjoyed this task. Why I was chosen was beyond me. Tasked with watching after the wild card. My hatred for clubs was almost humorous. My family owned many clubs in scattering cities, earning most of our money through those facets. Was my forte, something I was incredibly talented at, and yet I hated the process. My talent was for odds, determining who could win and what their chances were. My father would often send me to RCOs to rule out the ones willing to spend big money. I would pull them aside, offer them a true gamble. Fortune, power, respect, if they won. The ultimate price if they didn't, DH. If they accepted, they were taken to the back rooms. Turning a human into a vampire was a grueling process that involved copious amounts of blood. Often, the humans would perish painfully. Other times, the human would survive and endure the change. Those humans who accepted, upon DH, all money, land, and titles would be handed over to us. If they survived, they were inducted into the service of the king. We had been operating in the dark for hundreds of years, waiting for our moment to step into the light. The job was easy enough. The club swarmed with many of her kind, but was just outside of Alpha Maddox Desmond's territory. He was powerless out here, and incredibly elusive as it seems. It was known Alpha Maddox Desmond would be at this club tonight. Strict orders were placed on us. He was not to know a single one of us were here. No engaging. The night went on seamlessly. A waste of time, but necessary. Tristan Volakis, first in command, accompanied me to the nightclub. Tristan was the king's closest confidant, the one he trusted when he could none other. Tristan and I were not close, as the few of us in the king's inner circle refrained from building connections. Connections weakened the senses, dulled the mind. It was clear Tristan was set on a personal task, one directly from the king. I kept my eyes peeled, yet revealed nothing. I contained my shock as Tristan approached Lola, my mind reeling at the possibilities. The king was using Tristan, trying to find which string of Lola's to pull. The string that would make her question her loyalty and which side she truly fought for. A brief phone call dampened Tristan's plans, as I approached him and Lola. She was swaying on her feet, her eyes misted over. Tristan said his goodbyes and followed me from the club. There was a certain smugness in his step that couldn't be ignored. I lifted my eyebrow at Tristan. You can get into her mind. Another unanticipated factor. Didn't even put up a fight. Tristan murmured gleefully. She's completely untrained and unaware. Did you learn anything? I kept my tone tight. This was business. There is a chance. Tristan nodded, his lips displaying a confident smirk. She can be swayed. That night a few of our men ended another werewolf life. The DH did not surprise me, as I had already expected this outcome. What interested me was the placement of the body. The king had personally requested this position, this location. The boy sat just outside of Lola's bedroom, his dull eyes staring into her bedroom window. Panic filled the pack, spreading like wildfire. Rumors spread, and I made it my business to hear them all. Many blamed Lola, as others noticed the peculiar position of the body. A few days later the king called for me. I was to go back to the club, keep an eye on the wild card. Tristan was alongside of me for the second time, a new set of personal orders from the king. We arrived 20 minutes after she did. Lola's short stature was becoming easier to spot over the towering people. She trailed after Brianna, Mason at her side. The three of them were becoming quite inseparable. Watching during the daylight hours was impossible, but once night fell, the werewolves were fair game. Tristan approached Lola, her eyes glazing over almost instantly. Tristan was very skilled when it came to entering someone's mind, doing so subtly, decreasing the risk of panic. His victims never knew he entered their mind, dulling their thoughts. My eyes remained glued to them, even as they climbed a set of stairs and headed towards the large balcony doors. It was another little she-wolf that gained my attention. Brianna, taller than Lola, yet still shorter than I, brown hair cropped short, wide knowing eyes. My loyalty to my king had never been questioned, not once in the short life I have lived. I could have never considered the odds, the impossibility of this happening. Mate. Chapter 39. Brianna's P.O.V. mate. I gaped, looking up at the huge man before me. His skin was a beautiful bronze color, evident even in the crimson light. His hair was dark and curly, highlighting a sharp jawline and dark eyes. I am not your mate, she-wolf. Something flashed in his eyes, something he quickly stowed away in their dark depths. I found myself looking deeply, searching for what he had hidden. My heart fluttered, yet broke all at once. His scent was swirling around me, intoxicating me the way alcohol never has. He smelled of expensive cologne, warm and spicy but with a hint of something sweet. So complex, and yet I could taste every note on my tongue. That's our mate. My wolf frowned, a low whine leaving her lips. There's something strange about mate. He doesn't smell human. No, I frowned. You are my mate, but you're not human. My lips parted as I took in the man before me. His muscles rippled under his clothes. It was then I noticed how well dressed he was. An expensive pair of slacks topped with a crisp suit jacket. His muscles didn't match his outfit, and yet he looked like some kind of buff mobster. And you're not a werewolf. My voice was growing weaker as realization dawned on me. There were 3 species in this world. Werewolf, human and vampire. And now you see, little she-wolf. His voice was rough, emotionless while his eyes held more. I cannot be your mate. I could feel my heart nearly shatter in my chest, a tight constricting feeling wrapping tightly around my body. I was thankful Mason had gotten lost in the crowd, Lola before him. The two of them didn't need to see this, didn't need to see me be rejected. I wondered if I'd walk around like Mason after being rejected. It was clear what happened to him, even if Lola couldn't see for herself. I wonder if I'd have that same look of agony any time I saw a happy couple, any time someone spoke of mates and love. Why are you here? I tried to keep my voice strong, to convince myself this was what must be done. My Alpha's territory is just a few minutes away. This is unclaimed land. The man looked down at me, his eyes swirling pools of obsidian. Therefore, I am allowed to be here. You're here for Lola. This wasn't a question, simply a fact. The defensive shield that clouded his eyes told me I was right, that he was here for Lola. I couldn't understand why they wanted her, just another she-wolf. She had only just returned to the pack, to be tormented with rumors and suspicious deaths. Lola deserved better, especially after finding the strength to leave Tyler behind. And yet, some part of me called out to the vampire. My soul called out to his, finally finding its other half. Two species that were not meant to be together, finding out they were destined for each other. The entire thing stunk of Romeo and Juliet. I could only hope our ending wasn't as depressing as theirs. We can't just give up on him. My wolf whined, her ears flattening down. He's after Lola. I grimaced, plus he's a vampire. What if he was on our side? My wolf questioned, one of her ears perking up at the thought. I don't think that would happen. I frowned, he'd be turning his back on his entire species. Look at him. My wolf murmured, and I obliged. He's ours for a reason. See how he's looking at us? He can feel the mate bond whether he likes it or not. The vampire looked down at me in awe, quickly masking the emotion before I could truly appreciate it on his face. Are you going to reject me? My voice was small, my eyes pleading. I was never the person to be vulnerable, to put my heart on the line. But with my mate, it was completely different. My heart was on the line, hinging on just a few words. I couldn't help myself, I reached out, grazing my fingertips against his hand. His skin was smooth and tanned, much like toffee. The sparks I had heard about my entire life crackled up my fingertips. Finding my mate was everything a werewolf looked forward to in life, but what life could I have with a vampire? Don't think like that. My wolf snapped, Lola would accept us. If he came to our side, she'd accept us. My wolf was sure of this, and I wanted to be as well. Confusion flashed in the man's eyes, a brewing storm. He didn't answer my question, he simply stared down at me with his charcoal eyes. Will you reject me, little she-wolf? His head tilted, his face analyzing me as though this had become a game. My answer was immediate, my mind already made up. No, I kept my eyes burning into his. I will not reject you. Interesting. The word left his lips slowly, his guard securely in place. And you know, I will not join your side. I will not turn my back on my family, my species. I paused. What did I want? I just want a chance. My eyes were open wide, vulnerable. I was letting him know how much I truly had at stake, more than just a simple crush. A chance? He repeated. A blush formed on my face at the intensity of his eyes. I felt like an exposed nerve under his gaze. What's your name? I needed to know. I needed to see what this man was called, what name could possibly fit him. Giovanni. His voice was rough, and it was then I could place the light Italian accent. My wolf swooned at the sound, forgetting our decades-long hatred of his entire species. If I was able to place my hatred aside, why couldn't other people? Something was changing, something big. As far as I knew, nothing like this has ever happened before. The tables were turning, bringing werewolf and vampire together. Giovanni looked torn, judging from the flashes of emotion in his eyes. Just a chance, Giovanni. I pleaded, my voice growing stronger as I spoke his name. The odds are not in your favor, she-wolf. Giovanni tried to keep his gaze hard, but couldn't seem to stop it as it softened. But I will give this chance. Here. I tore a napkin from my purse, digging around for something to write with. When I couldn't find a pen or any other writing utensil, I grabbed my black eyeliner pencil. I scrawled hastily, writing the address of my aunt's old house. She had died years ago, leaving the house to us in her will. We never went there, leaving everything to collect dust. It was just outside of the pack territory. Close enough for me to slip away unnoticed, yet far enough to keep Giovanni away from Alpha Maddox. What is this? Giovanni raised his eyebrow, his large hands grasping the thin napkin. Eyeliner pencil. I blushed sheepishly. I meant the address, Little She-Wolf. Giovanni fixed an interested stare on my face. Oh! My face flamed, that's the address to my aunt's house. She died, but we never go there. We can meet there. It's outside my pack's territory. You would go against your entire pack for a mate. Giovanni's eyebrow raised, his dark eyes reading my face and mannerisms. I'm not going against my pack. I grimaced. What was I doing? It was clear neither of us would turn on our species, our family. And yet what was that flicker in Giovanni's eyes? The very flicker of emotion he tried too hard to contain. My gut was telling me something I needed to listen to. Giovanni's words were very different from his emotions, his thoughts. I knew nothing about his past, and yet I knew he was very skilled at hiding his thoughts. Then what is the purpose of this, she-wolf? Giovanni grimaced. My name is Brianna. I huffed. Just come to the house if you want. I'll be there when I can. What else could I say? I'm going to try and sway you to my side? I'm weak and can't toss away my soulmate? One other thing was strikingly clear, I could tell no one of this. Not until Giovanni switched sides, not until he could be trusted. Chapter 40. Giovanni's P.O.V. The little she-wolf was quite interesting to watch. Her face conveyed every emotion openly, putting them on display for the world. A chance, as she called it. I myself became a key player in the little she-wolf's game, a game to earn my loyalty. She was clueless to my enjoyment. What were the odds this little she-wolf would be successful in turning me from my own species? The logical side of me said the odds were slim to none, while some sliver of humanity within me was already hers. It was clear the price she was willing to pay, her heart. I couldn't begin to understand the lives of this animal-like species. Vampires considered themselves refined, choosing a mate that would suit their every need. Werewolves were slaves to some mythical goddess in the sky, one who dictated their own mate. Did these wolves have control over anything? I left the club that night with an infuriated Tristan. His anger swirled around him, but that wasn't the only emotion pouring from within. Longing and interest framed his face as he struggled to keep this information from my grasp. He was not fast enough, cloaking his face with a mask of indifference. Something has happened. I paused, lifting my eyebrow as I read the quick flicker of emotions. Tristan looked almost pained. Yes. Tristan nodded, something has happened. Did you fulfill the king's request? I asked, watching as his face hardened. I masked my own face, burying my own emotions deep within me. I swore to never let them see the light of day. A strange yet dull pain formed in my chest, my mind lingering on the little she-wolf. I was unable to complete his task. Tristan hesitated, something I had never seen him do before. Tell me if you must. I pressed, the king will find out regardless. I marked her, Giovanni. Tristan stopped walking, our forms cloaked by the night. I couldn't stop myself. You marked the she-wolf. My interest was more than piqued. Another factor in this complicated game. For just a split second an image of Brianna flashed in my mind, Tristan's mark glistening on her neck. Rage flooded through me, possessive rage. A rough grunt escaped my lips as I felt the mate bond roiling within me. Has something happened with you, Giovanni? Tristan turned, his own eyes calculating. I am simply fearing for your life, friend. I frowned, once again shoving the putrid emotions deep down. Do not fear for me. Tristan shook his head, but he still looked troubled. The king would not dare kill me while my mark lingers on her skin. Perhaps you are right. I shrugged, you may also be wrong. A mark is not a simple thing to remove. Trust me, friend. Tristan's eyes glinted mischievously. The king will not kill me. Tristan had his own motives, that much was clear. He was unable to hide what he had done, knowing the king would find out regardless. You would dare move against the king? I questioned. Tristan had been my longest friend, if you could call him that. We had joined the service of the king the same year, had been raised side by side. Only a fool would move against the king. Tristan scoffed, shaking his head. I simply did what our species must. I marked a mate of my choosing, one worthy of me. Something strange rushed through me, adding another overlooked factor to my mind. She is still half werewolf. I noted, she has an intended mate out there. What will your course of action be if her intended is not you? Tristan looked perplexed, as though the thought had never crossed his mind. This did not surprise me. Tristan was compulsive, living in the moment as he pleased. Consequences were not always in his mind. I am her intended mate. Tristan nodded, I am sure of this. But, I would kill the one destined for my mate. I nodded in agreement, but that sliver of Brianna within me was shaking her head. I could see her in my mind, her short brown hair glistening like silk. Her milk and honey skin creamy and soft to the touch. I almost had her. Tristan hissed, she would have been ours if that feral hadn't interrupted me. My body stiffened, my hand clutching the thin napkin my she-wolf had last touched. I already knew who he was talking about. You've marked the half-breed. The king's voice was calm, a calm I had gotten used to hearing. The king could be placated when he was angry, red in the face with rage. I had only seen this cold calmness fall on him one time. 12 men had died that night, painfully. Leave us. The king's voice whipped across us like ice. I and the rest of his men turned to leave. Stay, Giovanni. The king ordered. I wanted to sigh as Tristan had yet again pulled me into his problems. The rest of the men left the room hastily, not wanting to feel the king's wrath. Not a single look of pity had come our way. As far as they were concerned, we deserved our fate. What have you done, Tristan? The king turned, his eyes nearing black as they met Tristan's. Tristan was confident, something I found very strange. Standing on the precipice of DH, and yet he believed himself to be safe. What could possibly save him now? Unless there was a factor I had not included. What was the half-breed to the king? Why was she important when none others were? The shadows collected around our king, an ability only he possessed. They swarmed around him, alive as their silky voices whispered. Their words were cold, cutting against the skin like knives. As vampires we often trafficked in darkness, we were made from it after all. The king, however, lived in the darkness he was made from. The beginning of his line bestowed the gift of control, passing it on to the next generation. My lord. Tristan bowed, his eyes flickering warily to the swirling shadows that slithered at his feet. I simply claimed the half-breed as my mate. If I had known you intended to claim her as your own, I would have refrained. Curiosity flashed in my eyes. Perhaps Tristan wasn't as stupid as I had once anticipated. The strange glint in his eyes worried me, his life on the line. Tristan was playing a game of his own, one that would lead him far away. I do not wish to claim her as my own. The king scoffed, the shadows twitching eagerly around him. The half-breed and I are bound by blood. The truth, a factor I had contemplated but dismissed entirely. Blood. The king and the half-breed were related. She was his daughter. Tristan's eyes gleamed maliciously. It was clear this was something the king trusted with none. All had assumed his rule would end when he pd. No one suspected there was a chance for an heir. Should the half-breed embrace the shadows and take the throne, a queen would grace our presence for the first time in history. It was unknown why the king had never produced an heir, as if the idea was impossible. Knowledge about our species was scarce, scattered to the wind by our own kind. The truth about vampires lied with our own species, kept hidden over the decades. The marking process was much like werewolves. The male marked the female, and then vice versa. After both parties were marked, a bond was formed between the two. Their power combined, their very essence fused together. A vampire could not mate with any other than the one he marked. This was an impossibility. I looked on at Tristan, fully understanding his insane plan. He had known all along, suspected the importance the half-blood meant to the king. There was a very high chance I was looking at our new king. King Tristan, Queen Lola, heir to the Curitis bloodline. Chapter 41. Mason's P.O.V. Everything hurts, quite literally. My body aches from the weight of my own emotions, pressing down on me until the claustrophobia hits. The air turns thick and stagnant in my lungs. There were moments when I had convinced myself I had some semblance of control. I was now beginning to realize, I never had control. The illusion of control kept me sane for so long, and its absence was tearing me apart. I shuffled through the thundering club, keeping my eyes glued to Brianna. I refused to look at the dancing couples, refused to acknowledge the smell of lut and sex in the air. It was all too painful, resurfacing images I had spent a year trying to forget. I refused to look back at Lola, ignoring the insane urge that always came over me when she was around. Lola, a little bundle of fire and spice, but her heart was still pure. She hadn't known it at the time, but the first time we trained together, my heart was hers. I never expected to feel that particular emotion again, convinced it was gone from my heart for good. My wolf tried to convince me, tried to make me see reason, but soon he too was swept away. What chance could we have when two other men already craved her heart? She was not our mate, her mate was out in the world somewhere. What right did I have to take that from her? Could I truly expect her to pick me? Nonetheless, I couldn't continue ignoring how I felt. Lola had been the first one to grab my heart after what happened last year. We had moved from the pack a year ago. My grandfather on my mother's side became ill. He was an old man, so his condition wasn't surprising. I know it sounds harsh, but my grandfather wasn't a good man. He spent his life molding my mom into a submissive she-wolf, beating any form of disobedience from her. Maybe that was why I fell for Lola. Her strong will remained unbroken even with everything life threw at her. I could only stand idle while my mom cared for the man that caused her years of trauma and pain. The sight was sickening, driving me from the house at every chance I had. We lived in a small shack, right on the outskirts of the city. This gave me ample opportunities to go out and find something to do. For the time being, I found myself a job. It wasn't anything flashy, just a simple job at a family-owned sandwich shop. This got me out of the house, and gave me some spare money. My grandfather had a hefty will, leaving everything he owned to my mom. She was numb with shock for hours after hearing the news. I suppose somewhere in his sick and twisted heart, a part of him loved his daughter. Months had passed, my grandfather continued clinging to life. A stubborn man for the entirety of his life, of course he would fight DH. My dad was much like myself, fighting the urge to end my grandfather's life at every chance. Dad couldn't stand the pain he caused his mate, but my mom insisted. She didn't want him MD. After all, what satisfaction could be gained from KG a man already on death's door? Dad complied, and somehow found the strength to be in the same room as the man. Grandfather caused no issues while we lived with him. I think he knew my dad would end his life if he so much stepped out of line. It was just another day leaving Dev's Deli. My shift ended late into the night, but I didn't mind. Night had always been peaceful to me, clearing my head with the crisp breezes that drifted by. I had turned 18 3 days ago, accepting the crudely made birthday cake from my mom with a goofy smile. Mom had never been good at cooking, that was something my dad enjoyed. On my 7th birthday I insisted Mom make my cake. Year after year, I watched my mom's face light up as my dad made my birthday cakes. Her eyes would trail over every step he went through, asking questions along the way. Her birthday cakes were a horrible replica of my dad's, but I didn't have the heart to make her stop. Each year I'd eat my full of cake, telling her it was even better than Dad's. He knew of course, but couldn't stand to see his mate unhappy. The two of us protected my mom in every way we could, making up for the worst years of her life. I had left Dev's Deli, taking deep breaths of the crisp night air when a smell hit me. It was mingled with the smell of smoked meat and freshly baked bread from the deli. The scent of daisies and cotton swirled around my mind, my head turning in the direction of the scent. I turned down the road, any thoughts of walking home were long forgotten. The delicious smell grew stronger as I turned the corner and continued down the road. "Come on, sweetheart." A gruff voice chuckled lowly, "Just a little taste." "FK off, Steph." A rich voice snapped, fear absent in her tone. "You know I don't answer to no one else." My wolf surged, forcing me into a run as I turned the corner into the alleyway. A girl was pushed against the brick wall of the alleyway, her face contorted into a glare as she looked up at the man before her. The man looked amused, his eyes glinting as he stared the little female down. "Steph, I'm gonna FK you up if you don't back off." The woman snapped. "You can't FK anyone up." The gruff man chuckled, "You still need Felix to fight all your battles. Come next week you'll see." The woman spat. The entire exchange was weird. It seemed like the two knew each other, hated yet tolerated one another. She said, "Back off." My wolf spoke through me before I had the chance to react. Their heads whipped in my direction. It was too late to change my course of action, my fate was already decided. "Mate!" My wolf cried out at the woman against the wall, clawing at the walls of my mind. The man backed off from the woman, turning his deadly gaze onto me. A low growl escaped my lips, the man's eyes widened in response. I expected a fight, some form of confrontation from the man, but nothing happened. He turned to the woman one last time, keeping his hard glare on me. "You know what to do." The guy snapped, turning down the alleyway with a huff. His fists were clenched at his side as he walked into the distance. "Are you all right?" I frowned, approaching my newfound mate. As werewolves, you always imagine what it will be like to find your mate. You could never truly understand until you felt the real thing. Everything about this woman was perfection. Her skin was deep ebony, the color of fresh espresso. Her eyes were an intoxicating shade of brown, set with glimpses of amber and gold. Obsidian hair ran down to her shoulders, thousands of spiral curls grazed against her throat. Ruby red lips, long eyelashes, and high cheekbones. She was wearing an ankle-length dress, a few rings glinting on her fingers. Steph's a DK, but he's harmless. The woman shrugged, a hand placed on her round hips. I can handle myself just fine, you know. I'm sure you can. My eyes were dancing, a smile playing at my lips as I looked down at my beautiful mate. Now, do I gotta be worried about you, Mr.? Her dark eyebrow raised, but humor flickered in her eyes. She could feel the mate bond pulsing between us. It was clear she was a human, her scent unlike a werewolf's. She wouldn't know about the mate bond, but she could feel something between us, a connection of sorts. Of course not. I grinned at her, just one of the good guys. Good guys? She scoffed, her radiant eyes were twinkling. What's your name, good guy? Mason. I grinned, and yours? Adrian. She grinned, making me stagger. Her smile sent my wolf into a frenzy, wanting to mark her skin without warning. Beautiful name. I smiled softly, my eyes trailing over her face. It fits. You wanna meet up tomorrow? Adrian smiled in return, her eyes lingering on my own before they traveled down to my lips. Name the time and place. I breathed, completely taken with my mate. The little park on 2nd Street, the one with the fountain. Her eyes glimmered. Meet me there around 11 tomorrow night. Why so late? I questioned. I wanted to know more about her, I wanted to know everything. Wolves rarely had patience, and mine was not an exception. He wanted to carry her away, ignoring any screams of protest. I, on the other hand, didn't want my mate to fear me or hate me. Patience was key. I get off work around 10. She shrugged indifferently, the park's my favorite place to go. I'll be there. I grinned, my heart thundering in my chest. Excitement coursed through me, sending my hairs on end. This was the beginning of everything, the beginning of the rest of my life. The breeze shifted suddenly, lifting her coiled curls and swaying them to the side. Something bright stood out on her espresso skin. A bright scarlet mark stood out, placed on her shoulder. The mark was bright, and shaped like the blade of a scythe. The mark looked like a freshly done tattoo, the ink bright and vibrant. I wondered what the mark on her skin stood for, what it symbolized. What's that? I murmured, looking at the bright mark. Just a tattoo. Adrian shrugged, grazing the mark with her fingers. Chapter 42. Alpha Maddox's P.O.V. infuriating, the first word I thought of when Lola popped into mind. Addicting, the second word that described the little ball of fire that constantly tormented me. She had disobeyed me from the very beginning. Such a simple task I had given her. Arrive to training on time. She came late, making quite an entrance. I was beginning to realize the many qualities of Lola, the faults that made her even more intoxicating. The way her lower lip would jut out in a pout without her realizing she had done so. Her bright eyes innocent, a hint of mischievousness twirling in their depths. Her penchant for being late. Punctuality did not come easy for Lola. These qualities angered me to no end, but also served to draw us closer. She enjoyed pissing me off, that was obvious. I enjoyed exerting my dominance over her, making her see I was the one in control. It was clear she hated this, and yet a part of her wanted me to have control. She wanted to be powerless under someone else, their body writhing against her own, flushed with sweat and arousal. I could smell her arousal in her small bedroom, swirling around the two of us. She enjoyed my dominance, enjoyed the force behind my touch. After that moment, I knew she was made for me. Being an alpha has its perks, and its downfalls. Respect, authority, obedience. These were helpful in my work life, not so much my love life. Women did not pique my interest. They bowed as they met me, showered me with adoration and respect. They never pressed boundaries, never wanted to anger or upset me. It was the constant walking on eggshells that pissed me off. They feared me, rightfully so, but I had never KD members of my own pack. I KD traitors, rogues, and murderers. Women pursued me, but were all too dainty and complacent. They needed my strength to carry them, needed me to make decision for them. They never spoke out, never did as they pleased. I wanted a mate, not a ex-slave. Lola was a fire in the middle of the Antarctic. Beautiful, wild, and somewhat out of control. She burned as she pleased, heeding the advice of none. Her grandmother had been the first to tell me what happened that night. The truth of her heritage had stunned me into silence, something that never happened before. While this fact was disturbing and unsettling, I knew where Lola's loyalty lied. She might have been disobedient, but she was fiercely loyal to those she cared about. Half-blood, many werewolves were half-bloods. None, however, were half-vampire. Even as an alpha, not much was known about vampires. I wouldn't let this fact affect my pack. I more so wondered how this would affect her, how she would handle it. She's strong. My wolf murmured, if anyone can handle this, she can. What sent fury rushing through my veins like acid, was the scarlet mark bright on her neck. I had never seen such a mark before. For just a split second, I hoped it was a tattoo. Something about it glinted cruelly, as if telling the world she now belonged to one of them. I needed to know more, to know how to remove the hideous mark from her creamy skin. Tristan, the name left her lips effortlessly, mixed with a tone of confusion. Her voice was soft, much too soft to be speaking of another man. Alphas were inherently possessive, a trait I embraced in her presence. My control slipped that night, but I had done nothing to mend it. I sent her over the edge countless times that night, each time watching the pain and bliss on her face. I marked her chest with my lips and teeth, feeling the need to overpower the hideous mark on her shoulder. I was a determined man. By the end of the night, her body would respond only to my touch. It would remember the pleasure I had brought. I had used everything at my disposal to send her tumbling into bliss, everything but what she wanted. She pleaded for the one thing I wouldn't give her. She wanted me entirely, but bad girls often never got what they wanted. She had forgotten who she belonged to. I didn't need a mark to claim her, her body responded to me in a way that couldn't be replicated. Her back arched as wave after wave of pleasure hit her, and I made sure to watch her face each time. She fed on the pain mixed with bliss, fed on the feel of her sensitive core under my touch. Not once did she beg me to stop. Through all of the whimpers, the pleads, she had never once uttered the word stop. Well into the morning, I let her fall asleep. Leaving her in her own bed crossed my mind, but I couldn't force myself to move. Instead, I pulled the covers over her clad body. The creamy skin of her back was uncovered, giving me a good view of her round bottom. The taste of her skin lingered on my tongue, sweet and rich. I awoke by the sound of her shuffling from bed. Possessive pride flowed through me as I looked at the purple marks on her skin. The color purple was prominent on her chest, distracting me from the ugly red mark. I wanted to stay, wanted to spend the day with her, but life had other plans. There was work that needed to be done, especially now that I had left early. The signs were beginning to line up, pointing at vampires as the cause of Kenyon and Katie's deaths. After leaving Lola, I headed down to my office to place a few phone calls. Alphas from other packs were coming to visit, willing to lend their aid against the vampires. Many did not believe me, but they soon would. As the largest pack in the world, I held the power to call meetings such as these. Packs would comply if they wished to remain independent. It was all too easy to KL an alpha and absorb his pack. My phone calls lasted well into the evening, finally gaining an agreement between the irritating alphas. Alpha Julian had just been with his mate. The woman had just given birth to a set of triplets, just 2 years after the birth of their son. I excused them from the meeting, wishing them the best of luck. I requested the appearance of the packs closest to us, also calling in more warriors of my own. Alpha Zeke, Alpha Bran, and Luna Freya would be on their way come tomorrow. Alpha Zeke was a long-time friend, and I often provided aid when he asked. Alpha Bran was an insufferable at the best of times. Luna Freya ran her husband's pack after his DH, waiting until their son became of age. Room needed to be made to accommodate the new faces. The pack house would be full of people, something I detested. Sacrifices were in order to fit the amount of warriors coming to our aid. I walked back to my suite at the end of the night, a migraine forming at my temples. Working with other alphas was a nightmare. Often they believed themselves stronger, challenging me until my patience waned. I watched as Lola entered her own suite. She hadn't noticed me coming down the hall. It was difficult, turning into my own bedroom. I wanted to tear her door down and drag her back, demand she stay in my room from now on. I couldn't give in to those urges, not yet. Not until she was fully mine. The night was quiet. After a couple drinks, and reading over a couple safety reports, I turned in for bed. Sleep was not something that came easy when an entire pack rested on your shoulders. After a couple hours, the bedroom around me began to fade. Alpha Maddox. A voice in my mind hissed, alarm in her voice. Alpha Maddox. I shot from bed. My mind a jumbled, sleep-infested mess. Sleep clouded my eyes, but the voice in my head was clear. Brianna, Lola's friend. Alpha Maddox, they have her. The vampires have Lola. Brianna hissed as though she needed to keep quiet. The swimming hole, they're at the swimming hole. Chapter 43. Lola's P.O.V. Maya's excitement slowly faded into frustration as Grandma explained the techniques we can use to protect our mind. Meditation. Grandma nodded serenely. Learn to control your own thoughts and emotions. Keeps them out of reach. And how long does this take? I frowned, my mind running through the ways I could do this. A while. Grandma frowned. It's not an easy process, disciplining your mind. Well. I sighed, her techniques wouldn't be useful to me tonight. Where do I begin? Grandma explained how to meditate, telling me to picture a glistening oasis. She told me to look into the waters and see my own reflection. It seemed easy enough. That's only the first step. Grandma chuckled. The first step? I huffed, shaking my head. Fighting I could deal with. Learning to strengthen my body was simple. Strengthening my mind seemed difficult. I'm impulsive at the best of times. I'm hardly able to control my words, let alone my thoughts. Second step. Grandma continued, picture a library, stacks of shelves and books as far as the eye can see. Okay. I drawled the word out, books. Let your thoughts fill the books. Grandma continued, giving me a light smirk. You can have one book dedicated to Alpha Maddox, if need be, of course. I raised my eyebrow at Grandma and opened my mouth to let loose a snarky remark. She waved me away with her hand, a knowing smile on her face. My point is, fill the books with your thoughts and bind them tightly. Grandma nodded, looking much more serious. Tuck the books on their shelves and leave them there. That's it? I questioned. It seemed far too easy. That's it. Grandma nodded, the more you practice, the easier it will get. But I'll warn you, Lola, it's all too easy for the books to be shredded when you're first starting out. Got it? I nodded. How hard could it be to keep my brain books from being touched? Listen to Grandma. Maya rolled her eyes, she knows more than us. So you'll listen to Grandma and not me? I scoffed, figures. You get us into trouble. Maya pointed out, Grandma doesn't, and she makes amazing brownies. Grandma let me use my old bedroom to practice. She promised to ensure Dad wouldn't bother me while I practiced. I laid down on my bedroom floor, positioned in the middle of the room. Clearing my mind was incredibly difficult, not that I was surprised. Once my own inner voice quieted, images of Maddox and Tristan flashed through my mind. Maddox with his delicious dark hair, tousled to perfection. Tristan with his light locks and porcelain skin, his swirling blue eyes mischievous. I forced the images away as best I could, wishing Maya could provide some assistance. Grandma made it clear that Maya couldn't help. Whatever mind tricks the vampires used, it suppressed our wolves. Maya would be no use to me if they managed to slip inside my mind. The oasis in my head was fuzzy at first, the details an annoying haze. As I continued taking steady breaths, the image became clearer. Crystal blue waters, swaying wheat grass, and the scent of nature in the air. I imagined myself delving deep within my own head, a library forming around me. Rows upon rows of empty books lined oak shelves, each cover a different style and color. I walked the dark halls of my mind, plucking a deep amber book from its place on the shelf. The cover was dark, but intertwined with threads of gold. I thumbed through the rough pages, each one blank and without words. I figured I'd start with the beginning. I let my memories of Tyler flow from my mind and into the tightly bound book. Memories flashed and swirled around me. Tyler and I running through the pack house, his mom chasing after us. The time we went to the homecoming dance together. Every memory I had of Tyler pulsed through my mind, filling the pages of the book. When I looked down at the book, the pages were full. Messy script depicted each memory I ever had with Tyler, all leading up to our encounter in the woods. I tucked the book back on the shelf, and moved on to the next one. I had no idea how long it took me, as time seemed to be still in my mind. Book after book, memory after memory. Leather-bound books, hardcover books, short books, withered books. Each were as different and unique as the memories being placed within them. I finished with my memories of Alpha Maddox, every last one of them. His book was larger than the others, the cover a startling shade of black, flecks of silver embedded into the cover. I stepped back to observe my handiwork, satisfied with what I had done. When I opened my eyes, I realized three things. 1. The sun was beginning to set in the sky. 2. My body was incredibly sore. 3. I had the most migraine. Well. Maya's voice filled my head instantly. How did it go? I cringed at the sound of her voice in my head, my dull bedroom lights igniting a painful throb. It's all done. I grimaced as I replied to her, every memory tucked away. It was that easy. Maya frowned skeptically. Grandma said it wouldn't be easy. Didn't seem too hard. I shrugged, maybe it's a half-vampire thing. Maybe. Maya scowled. She didn't seem very convinced. Grandma was happy to let me stay for dinner. Dad grumbled a hello and pulled me in for a tight hug. The conversation was light, occasionally drifting over to Sean. I can't help but wonder where he is. Dad frowned, scratching at the stubble on his chin. He's probably somewhere warm, somewhere with a beach nearby. I shrugged, the hint of a smile forming on my face. He always said he'd live at the beach if he could. Well, I hope he comes back soon. Dad nodded, but his face held less worry. It was nice having another man around. Dad snickered at his last comment, flashing me one of his old cheeky grins. Oh really? I cocked my eyebrow at him, shooting Grandma an incredulous glance. What's so bad about us females? Ever since you and your grandma came back, the house has smelled funny. Dad shook his head, his eyes glistening with amusement. Lilac, vanilla, and all those sweet smells. Dad faked a shudder and chuckled as Grandma whacked him with a pot holder. Better than the smell of body odor and days-old pizza. Grandma shook her head pitifully, and to think I made an apple pie for dessert. Apple pie. Dad's eyes lit up, and he gave his mom a sheepish grin. Oh, don't you dare! Grandma scolded, you've lost your pie privileges. Dad's jaw dropped and I snickered at him, sticking my tongue out in his direction. Don't mock your dad. Grandma turned with her eyebrow raised. Amusement twinkled in her eyes, and I could easily tell how much Dad had missed the two of us. It was also clear he missed Sean, but sometimes people needed to get away. I couldn't blame Sean when I had left for an entire year. We finished our dinner, and after dramatic begging, Grandma let Dad have some pie. The afternoon was exactly what I needed, some carefree time with my family. It helped to distract me on what was to come tonight. I headed back to the pack house around 10 o'clock, slipping down the hallway and into my bedroom. I stripped out of my clothes, throwing on a pair of leggings and a long-sleeve t-shirt. After a while I could hear shuffling coming from Alpha Maddox's bedroom. I wanted to cross the hall and knock, to bother Alpha Maddox until he dragged me into his bedroom. The soreness in between my legs agreed. We wanted more of him. For once, it was Maya who reminded me. You can't go messing with him right now. Maya shook her head, but I could still feel her longing. If this plan is gonna work, we need you at your best. Alpha Maddox doesn't inhibit me, Maya. I rolled my eyes. He distracts you. Maya pointed out, he distracts me too. We don't need distractions tonight. You're right. I frowned, giving my bedroom door one last longing glance. The minutes ticked by slowly, and I was practically vibrating with nervousness. I stayed still on the edge of my bed, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. Each wave of anxiety made the bookshelves in my mind shudder, quaking under the weight. Grandma was right, I needed complete control over my emotions. I tried to picture the oasis, calming my mind as best I could. Only when the bookshelves stopped quaking, did I stand from the bed. 30 minutes before midnight, Brianna and Mason's voice filled my mind. You ready, Lola? Brianna sounded tired, yet determined. As ready as I can be. I nodded, doing my best to keep my nerves from my voice. You got this, Lola. Mason chimed in, his usual happy tone sounded stressed and worried. It'll be fine. I wasn't sure if I was reassuring myself or them. If Tyler's still interested in me that way, there's no way he'll let anyone hurt me. Sneaking from the house was easier than I expected. Little did Alpha Maddox know, but Tyler and I had spent years sneaking around his house. My footsteps were light and calculated as I crept down the hallway. I even went as far as to hold my breath, only breathing when I was clear from Alpha Maddox's bedroom. I slipped out the sliding glass door, remembering how the front door used to squeak horribly. "Did you make it out?" Brianna's voice murmured in my mind. "Safe and sound." I chuckled lightly, "No one noticed." "Keep calm." Maya murmured, "We need a clear mind." I tried to keep my mind clear as I headed towards the other side of town, stopping when the forest line came into view. I took a deep breath and walked into the forest. It was getting more difficult to keep my mind clear. Every little sound had me turning on my heel. I was sure Alpha Maddox would appear at any moment, dragging me away before I could say anything. Each sound was either a vampire coming for my life, or Alpha Maddox coming for my body. The true test was when the swimming hole came into view. My heart lurched and sped up, my bookshelves shuddering in my mind. "Calm, Lola," Maya urged quietly. "You can do this," Brianna murmured through the mind link. "We'll be with you the entire time." Mason nodded, and I could practically see the goofy grin on his face. I tried to picture my anxiety leaving me, a clear oasis becoming clearer in my mind. The bookshelves stopped their shuddering and remained still. I walked over to the swimming hole, noticing how different it looked at night. The swimming hole was where Tyler and I had come to relax, to get time away from his duties as future Alpha. In the middle of the night, the swimming hole looked mysterious and threatening. The usual clear waters were dark, looking like murky ink as it sat still under the dim moonlight. I had arrived early, and the minutes ticked by much too slow. 11:59. There was nothing but silence. The usual sounds of nature were absent. Not a single cricket chirped. The entire forest was holding its breath. 12 o'clock. My watch flashed, and I let my eyes wander around aimlessly. "Hello, Lola." Tyler emerged from the brush, no longer concealed by darkness. His eyes glinted hungrily as he stalked toward me. I refused to let my anxiety spike. Tyler was not something to fear. "Beautiful." Another familiar voice, "Wonderful to see you again." Tristan emerged from the brush, his light hair catching every ounce of moonlight. "Lola." Brianna murmured, "Focus." I painted an image in my mind, showing Brianna and Mason what was happening. A low growl rang out in my head as Mason caught sight of Tyler. "Any minute now." Maya murmured, "Tristan is gonna try to get into your head. You know why I'm here." I straightened my spine, and fought to keep my voice even and clear. "Tell me what I need to know." You want information?" Tristan mused, a sly smile on his face. "What will you give in return?" Tyler glared at Tristan, but quickly turned his eyes back to my own. For just a split second, I saw the Tyler of my childhood lingering in his gaze. He was in way over his head. Whatever plan he had was failing, being taken over by the vampires. I refused to help him. He made his choice, and now he was going to suffer for it. At Tristan's words, 2 more vampires came into the clearing. Each had Tristan's strange beauty, even though all 3 were wildly different. The first one was huge with tan skin and short curly hair. The second had skin the color of fresh espresso, his eyes gold and firm. "You said to come alone." My eyes flickered between the 2 new vampires. I kept any fear that threatened to fill me under control. "And yet you bring backup." I felt like I was wrestling a wild bull. The scarlet mark on my neck itched and burned, begging to be soothed by Tristan's touch. I was holding that part of myself back, all while controlling my emotions. "My friends Gabriel and Giovanni are merely here for protection." Tristan's smile was understanding and slightly condescending. We are on Alpha Maddox Desmond's territory after all. What did he say their names were? Brianna's voice sounded rushed, almost frantic. Giovanni and Gabriel. I murmured quickly, refusing to take my attention off any of them for a split second. Something happened in my mind, something that nearly threw me off guard. I could feel someone walking around in my head, their fingers grazing the books that sat nestled on my shelves. If I closed my eyes, I was sure I'd see Tristan's sly grin as he strolled around in my head. I forced every book to remain on its shelf, tightly bound and out of reach. My head wasn't foggy this time, my thoughts were clear but my attention was divided. Why don't you come with us, beautiful? Tristan murmured, taking a slow step towards me. Let me finish what I started and I will give you all the information you desire. I could feel his words bouncing around in my head, urging me to follow along. His words tried their best to dull my senses, but the books on my shelves remained tightly bound. No, I shook my head, feeling a small piece of me cower at the word. I will not come with you. Learn some new tricks. Surprise flashed across Tristan's flawless face, followed by irritation. No matter. Try if you will, but you are destined to be mine. My queen. That side of me whimpered at the word queen, and I couldn't help but think of how fitting it would be. Queen Lola. Snap out of it. Maya hissed. Lola, keep yourself together. Brianna scowled in my mind. My bookshelves stopped shaking and finally remained still. No one dictates what I'm destined for. I snapped at Tristan, reining in my irritation at the last moment. I belong to no one. Now give me the information you promised before I alert the rest of my pack. A sly grin formed on Tristan's face. You threaten me with your precious Alpha. Tristan's eyes flickered deviously. I will tell you one thing, beautiful. This is only the beginning. Your pack will fall, and you will take your rightful place by my side. Don't count on it. I shook my head, ignoring my burning mark. As much as I denied it, a part of me wanted to be with Tristan. The desire I saw in the depths of his eyes called to me, as well as the darkness surrounding him. It was alluring, promising power and praise I had never experienced before. Tristan continued worming his way into my head, searching for some way to weaken my control. While his face remained calm, I could feel his burning frustration. He had never been slighted before, never been resisted. For whatever reason, I was the ultimate prize for him, a prize he had to win. That only strengthened me. I was not a prize to be won. I'm stubborn, hard-headed, and fiercely loyal, Lola. You can't break me, Tristan. I managed to utter his name, not a trace of longing or familiarity in my words. What a waste of time this must be for you. Tristan's eyes flashed dangerously, his sly grin widening on his face. He looked like some kind of avenging angel or demon. Beautifully fair-haired, his porcelain skin appeared to glow under the moonlight. On the contrary, I've been meaning to ask you something, beautiful. Tristan's voice was rough and smug. Haven't you been wondering where your brother is? The bookshelves collapsed, each book tearing at the binding. Pages scattered to the floor, messy scrawling covering each torn scrap. My mind clouded with thoughts of Tristan. The mind link snapped, leaving me alone. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.